The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. This is Sunday, June the 28th, 2026. Welcome to This Week with Mary Holland, President of Children's Health Defense, and myself, Polly Tommey. Well, we've got a bit of a week for you, so let's go through these and we'll discuss as we go. The first one is Henrik Karolisen, and it's in the Defender, and the headline is HHS says no decision on COVID vaccine deal with Pfizer, but questions persist about $1.24 billion contracts. The controversy began after publicly available federal contracting records showed two CDC contract awards to Pfizer with a combined potential value of approximately $1.24 billion for pediatric and adult COVID-19 vaccines during fiscal years 2026 and 2027. The assumption that these contracts were being paid out is simply wrong, US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says. And the next tweet by Secretary Kennedy, for you all to see, will be in the show notes. And he says the claim that CDC has already spent $1.24 billion on COVID-19 vaccines is simply wrong.
This is kind of interesting. I'm glad that actually we're talking about this. So the U.S. government has what they call an IDIQ contract with Pfizer, meaning it's indefinite delivery and indefinite quantity. So the government can say to Pfizer, we want you to fulfill this contract. And Pfizer, I gather, has to fulfill it or has the right to fulfill it for the 26-27 COVID season. But the contracts are inactive, according to the government website. So the government has not requested this. So, but there's a lot of questions about this, Polly. So these are these contracts that are not, they're like, it's a sleeper contract. And actually, interestingly, Bobby Kennedy wrote about these in the context of the H1N1 scandal. So, it's better news than we thought it was. We thought that Kennedy had approved these contracts. That's not true, but it's still not good news that there are these sleeper contracts for over $1 billion for COVID shots. It is our position at CHD that the mRNA COVID shots should be off the market. They have killed too many people. They're not safe for human use. They should be off the market, full stop.
Gabbard, never seen before documents show Fauci lied to Congress. So outgoing Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, released previously unseen communications and documents that she said contradicts statements Dr. Anthony Fauci made in his 2024 testimony to Congress when he denied engaging in any substantive communication with intelligence agencies about gain-of-function coronavirus research. And just to say, Mary, Dr. Meryl Nass did the most amazing breakdown of this on Thursday, so I'm very grateful to her. So if people have more questions and missed that show, do go back and watch it.
Great. Yeah, so, Tulsi Gabbard has just resigned from the position of Director of National Intelligence. And before she did, she got these documents out. As some commentators say in the article, most of these documents were available through Freedom of Information. We'd talked about them, Polly. There's really no question that Dr. Fauci engaged in malfeasance and that the COVID virus with its fur and cleavage site had been subjected to gain of function. I don't think there's really much legitimate questioning about that. And as the next article will say, maybe Dr. Fauci will be coming before Congress sometime soon.
Yeah, so the next article is Michael Nevadakis. Ron Paul issues subpoena forcing Fauci to testify under oath. An inside source with knowledge of Senator Ron Paul's plans told the Defender, on condition of being anonymous, that Dr. Anthony Fauci is expected next month to testify under oath before the US Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs about everything from his involvement in funding gain-of-function research that may have created COVID-19 to the subsequent cover-up of a possible lab leak. Ron Paul's not going to let this go.
No, Rand Paul is definitely not going to let this go. So previously, Polly, Dr. Fauci had said that he would testify voluntarily. Then he retracted that. And so now Rand Paul has issued a subpoena forcing Fauci to come. And one of the points the article makes is that congressional subpoenas were upheld by the courts in the January 6th context. So likely Fauci will have to come. Paul Thacker, investigative reporter, suggests that he may be due to show up on July 29th. We'll see about that. And also it was very interesting. Senator Paul says that he does believe that Dr. Fauci's preemptive pardon given by President Biden on the last day of his being in office is going to be challenged in court as being excessively broad. It was a preemptive pardon from 2014 through 2024. So I do think there's a lot going on in this space. I really appreciate that we got a quote from Dr. Richard Ebright, a microbiologist at Rutgers University, who said Dr. Fauci essentially participated in killing 20 million people, costing the world $25 trillion, and engaged in fraud, perjury, and illegal gain-of-function research. So we will, of course, be following this story.
Michael Nevadakis, military reinstates flu vaccines amid Texas outbreak, but won't say if sick recruits were vaccinated. So less than 2 months after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ended the military's flu shot requirements after an outbreak at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas sickened at least 222 recruits and hospitalized 4. Mainstream outlets tied the outbreak and the June 12th death of recruit Keon McDaniel to the end of the mandate. But several physicians and researchers interviewed by the Defender said that there is no clear evidence linking McDaniel's death to the flu or showing that the policy changed his outbreak. And of course, Dr. Suzanne did a very good breakdown of that as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is just silly, right? I mean, people do get sick and people, you could easily die of heat stroke in the Texas heat doing all of the stuff that they were doing. There's no evidence that this was connected to the dropping of the flu vaccine mandate, but most of the military services have essentially reinstated it. So this is another story we will be following, and it follows on the heels of the Duty to Disobey film.
Absolutely. And talking of that, we have just days now, Tuesday the 30th. There are still tickets available, everybody. So, I mean, most of them are actually sold out. But do go on to dutytodisobeyfilm.com and see if you can get a ticket. There's certainly some in my area here in Austin. So we'd love to see you on Tuesday. Very exciting. Senator Ron Johnson here in The Defender. The story the media and the government don't want you to hear. On April the 29th, as chairman of the US Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, Senator Ron Johnson held a hearing and released a report about how Biden's health officials purposely turned a blind eye towards COVID-19 vaccine safety signals, according to Johnson. Mary, talk about this.
Well, I was just going to say that Ron Johnson, in utter frustration, because none of the mainstream media outlets would carry this incredibly important story, that the FDA knew that the COVID shots were going to kill people and they didn't warn anybody. He put this op-ed, this editorial, on the X platform. It has now reached over 3 million people, which is good news. But as he said, it should reach 100 million people. The VAERS data shows that there's been 1.6 million reported injuries from the COVID shots, 39,000 reported deaths. We know that's just a fraction of the real numbers. This is outrageous, Polly. It is absolutely outrageous that the media won't talk about this and the government's doing nothing. It is an outrage. It is just so outrageous. And we just have to keep saying it's outrageous. When the government and the media know that people are dying from something that they are promoting and something that they are pushing, we have to yell and scream until people pay attention.
Okay, Michael Nevadakis again. Study claiming COVID vaccines benefit heart health are hopelessly flawed, scientists say. This is a new study linking COVID-19 vaccines to a significantly lower risk of heart attack and stroke. It joins the latest in a growing body of research about the vaccine's benefits for heart health. I mean, Mary, it's ridiculous.
This is absolutely ridiculous. That is Vinny Prasad who said it's hopelessly flawed. What's incredible about this, Polly, is they're saying that there was an unvaccinated group and then there was a vaccinated group that took the flu shot and the COVID shot. You'll never know who the unvaccinated group is. The unvaccinated group are the group that took the flu shot. I mean, it's ridiculous. And Carl Yablanowski, on our science team, breaks it down in this article. It's utterly ridiculous. It's frankly, Polly, it's pathetic. You know, they're trying to say that that COVID shots and flu shots are good for your heart. It's revolting.
It is. FDA altered autopsy results of children who died after COVID vaccines. This is November 2025. The FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research identifies 10 child deaths related to the COVID shot. When's this going to end, Mary? My goodness. And the cover up and the truth and the cover up and the truth.
Well, that's why we're doing what we're doing, Polly. The FDA is basically walking back some of the deaths that Vinny Prasad found before he resigned from FDA. Brian Hooker points out that there are 84 child deaths from the COVID shots reported in VAERS. And we know, Polly, that the real number is much higher. There is no excuse for not pulling this product from the market immediately. There's just none. And as again, Dr. Ebright says here, there should be subpoenas, arrests, prosecutions, debarment, and clawbacks of federal pensions and benefits. And I couldn't agree more.
Brenda Belletti here. So Merck deliberately hid Gardasil linked to autoimmune disorders, says former FDA consultant. So this former FDA regulatory consultant says Merck failed to adequately warn the public that its Gardasil HPV vaccine could be linked to POTS and other autoimmune related conditions. Oh, yes, we've been talking about this one for years.
Yeah. So this was Dr. Amato, who teaches at Northeastern, but who had been an official at FDA. And he submitted an expert report in the litigation brought against Merck that Children's Health Defense supported. And that litigation has ended in a settlement. But what these expert reports show is, that Merck knew that it was harming people. It didn't put on stronger warnings. It didn't want to lose its profits. It overstated the benefits. It shows that they knew that there was DNA contamination in the Gardasil shots. And again, this shot should be taken off the market, Polly, but we're not there yet.
Well, FDA approves Merck's pneumococcal vaccine for at-risk kids as young as 2. That could mean anything. At-risk child under 2.
So this is frightening, Polly. So our amazing science team, Brian Hooker and Carl Jablonowski, have actually studied this new ingredient in this pneumococcal shot. It's called CRM 197, and Brian and Carl studied this in the context of a vaccine for Hib, Haemophilus influenza B, that was taken off the market in 2007. And apparently this was this great cellular biology discovery that this CRM is a carrier protein, but as Carl Jablonowski says, what's terrific for cellular biology may not be good for at-risk kids. And as Brian Hooker says, this is another train wreck waiting to happen for children. And we just pray that parents of young children really don't fall for this and they ask questions. This is really frightening. There was really no clinical trial for these pneumococcal shots. This is truly a nightmare waiting to happen. It's terrible. It's an expanded approval for these children. And like you said, Polly, it could be kids with asthma. It could be kids with an autoimmune disorder who may well be the most vulnerable kids. So it's terrible.
Moderna's mRNA flu vaccine gets unanimous thumbs up despite risks and low efficacy. The FDA's Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee voted 9-0 to recommend approval.
This is terrible, Polly. So some commentators like Toby Rogers sort of gave us a heads up. Vinny Prasad, who had been at FDA, said, I refuse to greenlight this, and he had to leave. So Toby Rogers has been saying this was going to happen. And a 9-0 vote, this VRBAC committee basically wasn't changed, unlike the ACIP committee at CDC. But the real story looks to be, Polly, that a big supporter of President Trump, Steve Schwartzman, who heads Blackstone, had poured $750 million into Moderna's flu shots. And so this is really payback for political support. This looks very corrupt. As Dr. Dalgleish in the UK, very outspoken on the mRNA platform and the risk of cancer, he said none of this should be approved. This is awful, Polly. And as we know from a recent Cleveland Clinic study, we know that people who get the flu shot are more likely to get the flu. So the idea that we're now going to have an mRNA flu shot is just, it's horrifying, to be honest with you, Polly. This is more bad news.
This next article horrified me when I sent it to you, Mary, and it's in People magazine, but also it's another outlets as well now. So child under 12 euthanized in the Netherlands, Dutch government confirms. The case is under review to ensure doctors follow strict legal protocols requiring for a euthanasia case. The Netherlands legalized voluntary euthanasia in 2002 and extended it to terminally ill children under 12 in 2024. There are no personal details about the child and their medical condition. I don't think this is okay at all, because we know in our world, well, what was wrong with the child? We would like to know what was wrong with the child, because in our world, many things can be done.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can just willy-nilly go around killing children under 12.
No. Polly, I agree. Allegedly, there are criteria. So the criteria in the Netherlands for this euthanasia for children under 12, set in 2024, was if the child is terminally ill and suffering unbearably with no prospect of improvement. Allegedly, this was the first child euthanized at the end of 2025, and this was reported by the health minister. The issue here, it's hard to say what the situation was with this child, with their parents, with their doctors. But what you and I know is that this is a slippery slope. And once you get the government starting to kill people lawfully, it can go south very, very quickly. And it is absolutely a risk to children with special needs, including those with autism and other disorders. There's no question about it.
Henrik Callison in The Defender here. US Supreme Court sides with pesticide giant Bayer in landmark cancer lawsuit. So Mary, this is big news.
Ugh. This is more bad news, Polly. I'm sorry. This is more bad news. So this wasn't a surprise either. So the Trump administration decided to come into this case, Monsanto versus Durnell, to support Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer. And once the federal government, the Department of Justice, takes a position, it absolutely strengthens that position. And so the argument here was that the Environmental Protection Agency said that glyphosate is not likely to cause cancer. Now, that's definitely contested by the European entity, the World Health Organization cancer thing. But the EPA said glyphosate doesn't cause cancer, which is just a lie. But based on that, 7-2, the Supreme Court decided you can't have a state law, a Missouri law, that conflicts with that. If the EPA said it doesn't cause cancer, the state can't require them to warn that it causes cancer. There were two dissenters, Justices Gorsuch and Justice Jackson. So they're kind of at the ends of the political spectrum on the right and the left. And to me, that's the good news here, Polly, that it does show that even on the Supreme Court, there are basically people who recognize that environmental toxic exposures that do cause cancer, that we know cause cancer, cannot be made legal with no remedy whatsoever, which is what their opinion said. But this is a huge loss. Basically, Polly, this is giving big pesticide, big chemical, the same de facto protection that big pharma has for vaccines, with no compensation program, and very difficult to prove causation. So this is bad news. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think we will come back to you once we sort of get a better idea of how this is going to be challenged, because this is terrible news that glyphosate, and let's talk about the next article because it relates to this.
Who wrote Trump's executive order on glyphosate? Lawsuit seeks answers. So carry on, Mary.
Yeah, so we can well imagine, Polly, that this was actually Monsanto/Bayer itself that wrote this executive order that President Trump put out in February of 2026. What this article suggests is that, and this is by the Center for Biological Diversity, and they are working on Freedom of Information Act requests, which is great news. But what they say is that the cancer risk that they know through Freedom of Information Act requests is as high as 1 in 100 for pesticides that we have in use. This is, Bobby Kennedy has talked about this a lot as secretary. It is horrifying that the US permits so many more pesticides and food additives than the European Union or any other country does. We just really have a higher, as a nation, we have a higher tolerance for toxic risks that cause death than other countries do. We prioritize money more, and it's shocking, really.
Well, going on to the next article, Breast Cancer and Pesticides. Another study suggests possible link. This is a study out of Michigan State University. It reviews robust county level data on pesticide use and breast cancer.
Yeah.
Again, this goes back to moving to the country because you think everything's going to be
Right.
healthy for your child. It's just another reason that it's dangerous now in the country.
It is dangerous. So they're saying that the incidence of breast cancer is higher in rural counties, and the more pesticide use, the higher the cancer rates, the breast cancer rates. So it's, we've just got to deal with this. And I think what becomes clear is that we really kind of need a new beginning here on these toxic exposures, because they keep giving giveaways to corporations and they are literally killing people.
Quite right. Canada drops the word injury from National Vaccine Injury Compensation Programme. The name change, which took effect June the 12th, follows the federal government's takeover of the programme in April from a private contractor accused of mismanaging the programme and delaying claims process. Canada's public health agency followed through with the name change, even though research suggests that vaccine injury was the most frequently searched phrase related to this topic.
More bad news. This is part of the cover up. So they changed the name from vaccine injury to vaccine impact, which is ridiculous. The only thing that was interesting to me here, Polly, was that the Canadian Injury Compensation Program has paid out a lot more money and more people than in the US. They've paid out $21 million, about $55,000 per person. The US program has paid out less than 20 and about $4,000 each. So it's not good news, but it's interesting.
Suzanne Burdick here. The question is, what's behind skyrocketing autism rates? Better diagnostics or an avalanche of toxins? All right, well, our scientists at CHG are saying better diagnostics can't be on their own explain the steep increase in autism and ADHD. Quite right. I think we know what's the main cause behind this.
Well, I think we do too, but I also think that it is a toxic load. It is a total load theory, as Patricia Lemmer says. And with all the different synergistic toxins in our environment that we've just been talking about, it lowers the level at which people hit that tipping point. That's what Brian Hooker has said here. And in this study, Polly, they didn't even look at the idea that it could be environmental exposure. So I'm so sick of this idea that doctors are just smarter or they've changed the criteria. Yeah, changing the criteria doesn't help to keep things consistent, but clearly it's not the only thing going on.
Yeah, and also, I mean, when I was at school, even when Billy was diagnosed, I'd never heard of autism.
I hadn't heard of autism either when Andy was diagnosed.
All right, so Jill Erzan here, defender. Wireless radiation guidelines are stuck in 1996, safety advocates warn. So this was our Children's Health Fund Senior Advisory Manager, Stephanie Lucrucio. She argued that federal radiation limits are based on outdated science and haven't kept pace with modern wireless technology. She was on a show and she did Culture Apothecary podcast. What's it called? Culture
Apothecary. She was on with Real Alex Clark, a new important influencer. And I think Stephanie did a great job. And she said that basically big telecom is following the playbook of big tobacco, big food, big pharma. No big surprise. And one of my favorite things that she said, Polly, is she said putting AirPods in, that conduct wireless radiation is like sticking your head in a microwave. Do not use AirPods. Use wired headphones if you're going to put something in your ears. But basically her point is that these regulations from 1996 that only look at creating heat in the human body are ridiculous now. The world has changed so much between cell phones and tablets and routers and wireless TVs and wireless phones. They're totally outdated health regulations. And then all the infrastructure, the antennas and the towers that are being built. And that's the basis for our serious advocacy and litigation effort. 704 no more. Section 704 is the one that basically gives federal preemption, allows the feds to do what they want. Local communities can't intercede. We're trying to overturn that through Congress, because what we have right now is, again, it's harming people. It is literally causing deaths and injuries to people, and it's wrong. And so we're fighting this.
And Stephanie did a great interview, so that's fantastic. All right, Suzanne Burdick here. Verizon wants to install a cell tower near their homes. They're fighting back with help from Children's Health Defense. So this is residents of Polk County in Wisconsin, and 5G initiative is helping Children's Health Defense.
Yeah. Yeah, we're helping this community, which is great. We can help before a tower is installed, and this is being put 500 feet from a home where the mom is homeschooling her kids. They would be exposed 24/7 to very high levels of radiation. And one of the things I love in this article, Polly, is there is a link to an interactive map done by a company called Airs Tech. And I looked up my home in this. You can look up on the map exactly where you live and see where all of the wireless infrastructure is around your home. And that is really valuable. So I would urge you to take a look at this article. Verizon wants to install a cell tower near your home.
Well, that's our news for the week. Some of it was a bit worrying, but we're on it, aren't we, at Children's Health Defense?
We're on it. You know, listen, at least we're getting the news. That's the first step, is to get the news, to digest the news, and then we can come up, once we are dealing with reality, we can come up with a plan, which is what we're doing.
Absolutely. And so looking forward to seeing so many of you on Tuesday at Duty to Disobey around the country. So do send us reviews of what you thought of the movie, any pictures. We'd love to see them. And as I said, we're very much looking forward to. Where are you going to be again, Mary?
I'm going to be in Rochester. I'm really excited. I'm going to be in Rochester, New York. There's only one theater just outside, and I will absolutely be there and looking forward to meeting people.
All right, everybody, pray big, stand firm, and never settle. And I'll see you tomorrow on CHD TV.
Good morning, Children's Health Defense, wherever you are. It is my great pleasure today to introduce our author, Dr. William Parker, who has just written the book about Tylenol and autism. William, welcome.
Thank you, Mary. It is a great pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're delighted to have you. So why don't we start with just, why did you write this book? What is this? Why did you write it?
Well, I had been working for years on the connection between acetaminophen or Tylenol and autism spectrum disorder. And in fact, it's the person that really had figured this out. There were two instrumental people. One was Stephen Schultz back in 2008, who first proposed the idea and had some great data. And then Peter Good figured it out in 2009. And basically, it was languishing. Nobody is talking about it. And, you know, it was one of the CHD staff members that said, William, you should really write a book. You know, nobody's reading your publications, and the book is better. So it was your idea, and thank you.
Well, we're happy to hear that. And I have to say, having read the book, I love the fact that it's quite autobiographical. You sort of give us a little insight into your growing up and how you got involved in science. And it's really a wealth of information, not just, it's by no means a sort of cold, clinical, scientific text. It's quite fascinating. So you found out about these studies from 2008 and 2009. Tell us the essence of that Schultz and the Good study. Tell us why it sort of impressed you.
Well, so the Schultz study was really the first one to say, hey, you know, my kid got the MMR vaccine, and maybe it was the way he describes it, just days and days of constant acetaminophen that was a huge problem. And so he was a dentist. He quit that practice, went to the University of California and did what's called a case controlled survey study, and found that, wow, okay, if you look at regression into autism, the common factor there is almost always, not every time, but almost always, it is acetaminophen use. So that was, and then Peter Good really put it all together in 2009 and said, hey, wait a minute, if you back off and look at the big picture, look at the timing, and it was already known in the 1980s that kids with autism can't metabolize Tylenol safely, which shunts it. And everyone has known this since the 1950s. It shunts Tylenol into a very toxic metabolic pathway. Literally, your own body converts Tylenol into a poison.
Wow. So actually, let's take a step back, William, and tell us, what is acetaminophen? What is Tylenol? Like, what is it for? What is it made of? Give us a little bit better understanding. We think of it as just like this name. What is it?
Well, first and foremost, it is a chemical. It's a coal tar derivative. It is structurally very similar to an old compound called cresol, which used to be used as a preservative in railroad ties. It's a black tarry stuff. So it's, and there were
Oh, that
three
sounds
different.
great.
Yeah, I mean, it's people think of it as your child's friend, but I mean, in reality, there's three drugs: phenacetine, acid amylate, and Tylenol, and acetaminophen, all in the same class, and the other two have already been banned in the United States. They're all very similar, and it's actually turns out Tylenol is similar to alcohol in a lot of ways. They're both of them treat fever, both treat pain, and both are converted by it's the exact same enzyme into a toxic metabolite by our own body.
Hmm. Okay, but it's from coal tar, and it's been used to reduce fever and to reduce pain. Is that?
Well, it originally is derived from coal tar, but now we just synthesize it from scratch. So
Mhm,
yeah, it's you find these kinds of compounds in coal tar,
mhm.
right? And then of course we get better at synthesizing mass quantities. We don't have to
Right,
isolate them from coal tar anymore.
right. But it's to reduce fever and reduce pain. Is that right? Its
That
purpose.
is correct.
Okay. And so I think you make the point that it had traditionally been used in adults, but then somewhere around the 1980s or so, it started being used more prevalently in children. Is that correct?
It came on the market in 1886 as it was acid aniline, but it's converted by the body into acetaminophen. So it's been around for a long time. And there's a paper from the very early 1900s that says, hey, you can actually use this in babies. And then there's another paper from the 1930s to say, hey, if you mix a bit of brandy with this, then it can work for children. So it's it probably was had children exposed to it occasionally
Hmm.
for generations,
Hmm.
and it before autism was described in detail in 1925 by Grunya Sukareva, and then again in 1943 by Leo Connor. And so what you got then is in the 1990s, suddenly there's giant marketing. So this is kind of a new thing where you've got this giant marketing campaign to tell people, and they use emotional advertising. So the idea is that you've got a picture of a sad baby, you got a picture of your chemical, and then you got a picture of a happy baby. So that tells everyone what the pharmaceutical company's not allowed to say in words, that use this chemical and your baby will be happy. So people buy, this advertising works. They don't spend $500 million a year
Right. For
on
nothing.
something that doesn't work.
Right. And one of the issues that we certainly have been focused on, as has Secretary Kennedy, is pharmaceutical advertising, right? In all countries of the world except for the US and New Zealand, that's for prescription drugs. As it is, Tylenol and acetaminophen are over the counter. Isn't that right?
Yeah, you can get them prescription, and certainly the one of the big dangers now is they in 2011 they created an IV formulation, which they're using in labor and delivery. So you get it. You can, I mean, there used to be a company called Toys R Us, and they had 4 different flavors of
Oh my.
Tylenol for infants and babies. So you can get it anywhere, but in addition, and this is what we have to. This is one of the things, Mary, that we're really struggling with, is to make people aware that it is in so many places. And even if you become aware of it, oh, don't use it during pregnancy, you get it during labor and delivery, which is even worse. And then most people right now are focused on pregnancy, and they're not thinking about,
Right.
early childhood when they get a vaccination. Well, if I give them, if my kid has a horrible reaction to the vaccine, I give them this for 2 weeks, it's not going to be, not good.
No. So what is the evidence? Tell us the best evidence linking acetaminophen and autism.
Right. So that's a great question. And I always say that there's no one single piece of evidence. And, back in the day when, my lab discovered the function of the human vermiform appendix as a
Right.
safe house for beneficial bacteria. And it was the same thing back then. We're used to running one incisive drug trial, placebo controlled, blinded, double blinded, but that's not normally how science works. I mean, that's not how we figured out that, the sun is the center of the solar system back in the day. Science normally works by a lot of different evidence coming together. And that's what we see, is that I can the Schultz study was really good. People are extremely compelled by the fact that every veterinarian knows you can't use Tylenol in a domestic cat,
Mhm.
because they're deficient in a certain enzymatic pathway that safely takes care of acetaminophen. And of course, newborns are deficient for at least the first 2 months in the exact same pathway.
Yeah.
So it can kill it. And, the laboratory animal studies are so convincing. I mean, we were giving this to children probably since about 1886, and it wasn't until 2014 that we realized, wow, this is super, super toxic in a newborn laboratory animal, such that it could never even be tested experimentally in a baby today. I mean, if we followed the actual rules that we have in place, and in my lab, we use doses lower than what they give to children, weight-adjusted doses in these baby,
Mhm.
call them lab pups, and it's just super toxic. So, and then of course, there's the big study out of Hopkins showing that, wow, you can predict 50% of all cases of autism if you just run the math on their numbers. These huge associations. A third of women had almost a fourfold increased risk of having a child with autism just based on the amount of acetaminophen a
Wow.
baby is born with. So that's
Wow.
amazing. And then there's of course the super data from Sweden, which gives us exactly the results we expect, even though everybody's misinterpreting that. It's one of the I don't, from what I can tell, this is just a combination of bias with naivete. I don't think the scientists doing this have any evil intention, but a sophomore statistics major knows, don't analyze the stuff this way. It's a just horrible mistake that we see right now. And they're actually looking at good evidence, to your question, really good evidence, and misinterpreting it.
Mm-hmm. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I've heard is you've got this associational evidence in humans, you've got this animal evidence, but that because the risk is so great, you actually can't do a clinical trial today because the drug is so harmful. Is that correct?
Well, so there's a couple of issues with running a clinical trial which would intentionally expose people to Tylenol. Number one, there is so much evidence of harm. And, I only mentioned, a lot of this stuff, because you've been fighting this fight against autism is not genetic. So a lot of the evidence is there. It's just, telling us that it's heritable because susceptibility to Tylenol is largely heritable.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this giant pile of evidence, but it's just people aren't paying any attention to it, is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. So what's the most amazing evidence of acetaminophen causation of autism that you've come across over the years?
Well, I think one of the most obscure things that we found was we were looking at people with cystic fibrosis, and it looks like they're resistant to autism. And I mean, this is because they're super metabolizers of acetaminophen. So, we're working with lung transplant surgeons, and until recently, right, cystic fibrosis was sort of a death sentence, and, the lung transplant surgeons were working with these people on a regular basis trying to prolong life, and they had just never seen anyone with any kind of, on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked to people that were working with cystic fibrosis community groups and outreach groups, and we don't know that, but it is known that they are resistant to acetaminophen toxicity. They're super metabolizers, and it seems that they're resistant to autism. So that's sort of one of those obscure, really interesting things that we stumbled onto, just kind of bizarre out.
That is fascinating. One of the early things in your book that you describe is that you had to leave your laboratory at Duke University, where you were very happy. Can you tell us a little bit about that whole experience?
So the biggest mistake I made, and my wife warned me, that just don't fall in love with an institution because it's a business. And of course, I was naive. I had been there for 25 years, and we published our first paper that was really focused on, and what we said was, look, all of these risk factors for autism, they make Tylenol more toxic, and there's a lot of other things telling us that Tylenol is connected here. So when I published that first paper, then all of a sudden there's a list of things that companies do for retaliation, quote unquote retaliation, and we're trained at Duke, and I'm at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill now, not to do those things. But all of those things happened to me while I was there. So it was sort of, and then it was Jennifer Margulis. I don't know if you know her.
We love Jennifer. She's written for us over time. Yeah.
Wonderful human being. And a year after, they shut down my lab. So it wasn't like I had to leave. They just shut it down and just told me it's not in our strategic best interest to keep it open. So a year after that, she called me up one day and said, "Say, did you know that the president and CEO of Duke University is on the board of directors for the manufacturer of Tylenol?" And of course, I did not know what had happened.
Yeah.
It was just surreal.
Yeah, I think, and you point out that there were even other clear conflicts of interest between Duke and Tylenol and your work. And so it sounds like they did not want that work being done at Duke because it might, I mean, at least one can infer that they wouldn't want that work done at Duke because it would interfere with the relationship with Tylenol.
Yeah. As a scientist, we're really concerned about associations and causation, and we have no proof. Like with the acetaminophen, there's so much evidence. We've made the connection, say, yeah, there's causation, but we can't prove that that's why my lab was shut down without telling me why, even though it was funded. But that does seem like a very reasonable explanation that there was some conflict. And,
So you're now doing a lot of animal research. Tell us a little bit more about that. What animals, why is that significant? How do you learn from that animal model and translate that to human health?
Well, so on the one hand, the first study that came out in 2014 was super incisive. It wasn't from my lab, but, and it just showed that even low doses, just 2 doses of Tylenol when the animal's very young, can cause permanent damage. So you say, and then 15 other papers have been published showing that it causes problems, including one from my own lab. And in rats, it's really different than in mice, which is, again, really different than in humans. So one question is, well, why keep doing research? And I think there's still resistance to this idea. And CHD has done an amazing thing in helping get up the analytical chemistry running so that somebody that's not biased can actually look at direct damage from acetaminophen. And that's a beautiful thing that CHD has done. And so right now, one of the huge things that we're doing is people are still focused on pregnancy, and we just want to see in a lab animal model, is the newborn truly more sensitive than the fetus? And based on all the pharmacology, toxicology, and all the observational studies, it all makes sense. We're going to be able to check it directly, thanks in large part to my colleagues at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and to CHD for working with an analytical lab to get this thing up and going. Thank you.
Well, I think, autism is so much at the heart of, what we're concerned about, right? The toxic exposures that are harming children. And so whatever those toxic exposures are, we definitely are interested in that. So recently, I guess about almost a year ago, the president and Secretary Kennedy came out to talk about the role of acetaminophen. What did that do to your life, to your science? How did that affect you?
Had it not been for President Trump, Secretary Kennedy, I think I would have been similar to Stephen Schultz. I would have published some really amazing work, and then it would have been completely ignored. So when President Trump and Secretary Kennedy get up and say something, then you can't ignore it. And then there was a magazine called The Atlantic, and they did a hit piece, but it's like, great, this is, I showed them all this evidence. I showed them 32 lines of independent evidence, and they summarized it and really just misrepresented it in a profound way, in a demonstrable way. So, this is, even though people don't like to hear the message, it was the way to get it going, and people now are listening. So, and then in the mainstream scientific community, I honestly have been, I wouldn't use the word disappointing because I should have seen this coming. I shouldn't have been disappointed, but it's been kind of surprising to me. And there's one schematic diagram we have, could we pull that one up? And so if you look at the schematic diagram, it sort of shows you where the risk is, as far as we can tell from what we've been able to summarize. So the risk seems to be fairly low during pregnancy, and there's not that many women that use that much acetaminophen during pregnancy, but there is probably some risk, and women should be warned ahead of time if they're using acetaminophen for chronic pain management. And we don't have any data to know. No, there's just not enough information to know if occasional use to treat a fever is bad or good, because you're blocking maternal immune activation, which can be bad. So you're basically immunosuppressing yourself as a pregnant mom when you take this. So that we don't know. But then there's a huge spike right in labor and delivery when you clamp the umbilical cord, because that's when the baby has to process the drug all by itself. And baby livers, as we mentioned before, just like cats, can't process this drug very well. And then we see associations with induction of regressive autism up to about 5 years of age. So that's what the schematic diagram looks like. And everybody became focused on pregnancy. So that's the first major mistake, right? And then there's a second major mistake that we can talk about that's a little more, I'll have to explain that in some more detail. But why is everybody focused on pregnancy when clearly that, the mother, if you line up 1 million people based on how well they can metabolize acetaminophen, at the front of the line would be a bunch of pregnant women. I mean, their livers are really good at processing this drug. And at the bottom of the line would be a bunch of newborns. And then right next to them would be a bunch of children with autism, because it's, again, known since the 1980s. And 4 studies have subsequently confirmed it, that they can't really process this drug very well.
That's fascinating that there's been this focus on the fetus and not on the newborn, when the newborn really doesn't have the mother's machinery, the mother's liver to assist it.
It's largely, I think, an accident, or not an accident. It's kind of just it turns out if you're a medical doctor and you want to tell one of your trainees, your residents, hey, we need to study this, the best data comes from pregnancy, and it's the easiest to get. So it's just sort of that's how everybody did it, just a matter of convenience from what we can tell.
Now you said there was another big mistake or another big misinterpretation. What was that?
Right. So if you go on the Google AI right now and you ask it, does acetaminophen cause autism? And technically acetaminophen doesn't cause autism, right? You've got to have a lot of risk factors, a lot of other stuff going on, genetic susceptibility, some kind of infection. If you ask parents what was associated with my child's, regression into autism, number 1 is vaccination, number 2 is fever, and then infection, all treated with acetaminophen. So, you got to have other stuff going on. But if you ask the Google AI what's up, it'll say, nope, no connection whatsoever, because of something called a sibling control study. So I made, there's a graphic on that. That's great. So if you look at the little white spots there, you'll see on the left, if you just look at the data, there's almost a 2-fold risk. And this is during pregnancy. Now, 2-fold is fairly, you say, well, that's horrible, but it's smaller than labor and delivery by a long shot. But there's almost a 2-fold risk, those little white spots of...
In the graph on the right? You mean the white spots on the graph on the right?
Yeah, the graph on the right, the white spots.
Yeah.
If you look at the top left of that graph, what you'll see is that there's almost a 2-fold risk if you use a lot of acetaminophen during pregnancy, 2-fold increased risk of having a child with autism compared to no use. And then what they do is, and you can see as you move towards the right on that graph, that the risk goes away because they adjust more than 30 factors out, and last, including genetics, which is the sibling control. So it's just this, and so you say, well, is that not valid? And the bottom line is, no, that's absolutely not valid. And if you look at the blue squares.
What do you mean by the sibling control there, William? I'm not quite clear.
Right.
Yeah, explain that.
Yep. So so at the bottom, you have 4 dots there: Model 1, Model 2, Model 3, Model 4. So Model 1 is essentially not adjusted.
Okay.
All right. And then you start adjusting for factor. You adjust for about a dozen or so factors in Model 2, and the risk goes down. So they're just adjusting away risk. They're focused more and more on people with no risk. And we know acetaminophen is not dangerous if you have no risk. And then the Model 3, they adjust for more than 30 factors. Okay. And then Model 4 is what we call their sibling control. And there's other problems with that are statistically.
But what does that mean? That they look at the siblings that don't have autism? What does that mean?
So that means that they're looking at siblings they're looking at paired siblings, and one of them had acetaminophen and one did not.
I see. Okay.
And then they're looking at, and it turns out a subsequent study was done showing that if you do a further analysis of that, what you'll see is there's still a huge risk if the first sibling got acetaminophen, but not if the second one did. So which tells us there's something wrong with the study. But I think the key point here is that if you go back to that figure, you see those blue squares.
Yeah.
That's a computer simulation. What would happen if acetaminophen plus risk causes autism, and we run the exact same analysis that the authors of that Swedish study ran. So in other words, they're getting exactly what we expect, and they're saying, oh, this proves that acetaminophen is safe, which is, I mean, I hate to use the word crazy. It's not crazy. It's not insane, but it's just a horrible mistake, right?
Absolutely. So, in light of your revelations and the fact that the president and Secretary Kennedy have promoted your findings, have there been any changes in clinical guidelines being proposed to OBGYNs? And no.
No, there was a temporary dip in prescriptions in emergency departments, but again, those emergency department prescriptions are not for chronic pain, which is where the risk is. Those are for, you know, an occasional, you know, fever or something when somebody has to go in because they're so sick. So if you run the numbers and do the calculations, that may have decreased temporarily. The prevalence of autism may be 1%. It's not going to show up statistically. I mean, introducing other chemicals and drugs or, you know, into the environment is going to have a much bigger effect than that, just because of the drug interactions.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but despite the publicity and despite the clarity of the science, it hasn't moved the needle yet in terms of clinical practice and recommendations to.
You know, I wish I could correct you, Mary, but I cannot. You're absolutely correct. It hasn't. Right now, it hasn't moved the needle. I mean, the obstetricians need to know about this, and they almost immediately came out and said, nope, doesn't affect us, and quoted those sibling control studies.
Yeah, I got it. So what else do our viewers need to know, William? What can they do to spread the word, to help bring awareness? Because nobody wants to really injure their child, and yet somehow in the polarized world we live in, I think the message is being tarnished by the messengers to some extent.
Yeah, so I think one of the things you can do is, of course, take a look at the book and get and educate yourself. And then the main thing, I think, is to make a birth plan. So you don't want to be making snap judgments. You know, Look, they're giving acetaminophen IV in labor and delivery, and you don't need it then, right? So you just want to make sure that you have a birth plan and that the physicians know this is how we're going to do it. We're not going to expose the mother to any acetaminophen until after the cord is clamped. And, you know, in a lot of places it's just on protocol, and they're trying to save the mother from more opioid exposure later. So the purpose of, and acetaminophen alone doesn't work for that anyway, but the bottom line is the purpose of that is to spare the mother, and giving it before the cord is clamped does no good whatsoever, but it exposes the baby to a massive amount. And then, of course, parents need to be educated about all the data, not just a sibling control study, but all the data from early childhood, you know, the connection with circumcision and acetaminophen use. I've had a grandparent call me and say, my kid is really miserable after a circumcision. Can I give them Tylenol? And I can't give them medical advice, but I can just show them, oh, okay, here's the studies, which are one in the U.S., one in Denmark, showing, you know, that there is an effect on social awareness and on infantile autism.
Is there, I don't mean for you to have to give medical advice, and we don't give medical advice, but are there alternatives that parents can use for young children in pain in particular? I think many of the physicians that come on CHD TV talk about how you don't need to be frightened of a fever unless it's very high. It's actually the immune system working. But let's say a child is in terrible pain for whatever reason. Is there any alternative that they should be aware of as a potential alternative to Tylenol?
Well, that is a great question. And, you know, as you probably know, all of my patients weigh about 1 pound and have fur in a tail. So, you know, I'm not qualified to give medical advice, but I can tell you that when I go talk to doctors, if I go to the functional medicine conference, they're like, pain, there's lots of ways to deal with that. Lots of ways. So again, it comes back to people educating themselves. If I go to a modern medical center where I'm from and talk to a 30-year-old doctor, a 40-year-old doctor who their entire career has been basically awash in Tylenol, they are going to have a different response. They're going to be like, well, how do we survive without this?
Right.
So, and if I talk to a physician my age, so like they remember the days before Tylenol. They know it's never been shown to be life-saving. We know that.
Right.
My lab knows that because we've looked at every single safety study, and it was never tested for neurodevelopment,
Right.
and it was never shown to save a single life. That would have been major news with all this testing that was done. So I would say educate yourself, talk to people who know the ways that without Tylenol, fevers and pains can be treated.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us, William?
Well, I would say that I'm extremely grateful that CHD is interested in this topic and has really pushed this to the front. I think without you and Bobby Kennedy and the president, I mean, the pandemic would just keep going up and up and up. I mean, the new data coming out of California is horrible. We think there's an interaction between chronic use of marijuana and Tylenol, and you know, they both interact through the same pathways in the brain. So it's just, we need to, it's desperate. We need to get the needle moved. We need to make changes.
Right. Absolutely. We want to spare children and their families from severe autism, which can be truly, truly debilitating and horrific in the world we live in. Well, William, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for coming on. And I'm sure as this story develops, we will be happy to have you come back on.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
My name, Deneen Bellino.
And this is about your husband.
Yes, Vincent Jimmy Bellino.
All right. So, was he vaccinated with the COVID shot?
He was not.
So you and him, none.
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 Why did you decide not to vaccinate?
We wanted to do our research first. That was all. Originally, we weren't totally against vaccinations. My daughter's been vaccinated, you know, but we just wanted to do our research on this particular vaccination before we made a decision.
Okay, so did he start to feel unwell? What led to him going into hospital?
The guilt. December 27th, we were all at home. There was about 6 of us. I had company. And I had to send my father over to the hospital for something completely different. He wasn't feeling well.
Father?
My father. When my father got over to the hospital, I called to check on him, and they had said that he was COVID positive. And I couldn't believe it, because my father had been in my home for weeks. I just rescued him from Missouri. He had been in my home for weeks. He really wasn't going out. I thought, this is impossible. He couldn't possibly have COVID. Anyway, the ER did tell me that he tested positive for COVID, but he did not have the COVID pneumonia, the glass-like opacity shards that they keep talking about or whatnot. So anyway, they had admitted my father.
Had your father had the COVID shot?
No, no. So while we were home, knowing that my father tested positive, we then decided to get tested. It came back positive for every one of us in the household. Myself, my husband, my little girl, and a friend that we had over that was staying with us throughout the Christmas holidays. So on 12/27, our test came back positive. We stayed at home. Now, here's my big thing is this. During that time in 21, I knew and heard about remdesivir, and I knew that it was not like a good thing. It's not a route that we wanted to go. At this point, we're already clued into ivermectin, HCQ, whatnot, that they're forbidden meds. Of course, you couldn't get them anywhere, right? So I called the hospital and told them under no circumstance would my father get remdesivir, under no circumstance. So my point to that is me and my husband already knew about remdesivir, not to get it. So we just tried getting well at home. Oddly enough, I feel like I didn't get affected so much as my husband. I think my husband was just scared. Now at this point, December 27th, 3 days later on December the 30th, his mom was also in the same hospital as my father, same floor. They pass away together on the same day, 12:30, 21, same floor, same hospital, 20 minutes apart. So my husband loses his mother, I lose my father. Different circumstance. My father didn't die from COVID. My mother-in-law did not die from COVID, although she tested positive. She herself had signed a DNR. So my point being is my husband was so distraught. Obviously, he lost his mother. And I feel like that kind of kicked in more of a sickness.
What did they write on the death certificate of his mother?
Of course, COVID, on every single one, and on my father as well. So my point being, my husband had a very good, or so he thought, relationship with his primary doctor. He had asked her months ago, God forbid if I get COVID, would you treat me? You won't turn me away because I'm vaccinated. He had conversation via email through a gentleman that he started researching. Is it Gert Van Bosch? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So they had, conversed back and forth via email. At any rate, my husband tests positive. He calls his primary. He had a fever. He couldn't kick it. He was doing a little bit of Tylenol. He called his primary, and she refused to administer anything to him. Matter of fact, she didn't even have the courtesy to call him back. She had his secretary call him back and told him to take Tylenol, and that was it. Okay? I didn't have a fever. For some reason, it didn't affect me. I don't know why. It did, but it didn't. I think being the female of the house, you might know what I'm talking about. You feel like you got to be up running, taking care of everybody else, right? You can't lay down. You got to make sure everybody else is up and moving. So January the 3rd comes, and I do remember hearing something that if your pulse ox drops below 90, you want to go get some oxygen. His primary had also said the same thing. If your pulse ox drops below 90, you can go to the hospital, you can get some steroids and get some oxygen. Okay, so January the 3rd, I had a pulse ox a machine for years in my pocketbook, and I was making sure everybody in the household was checking their pulse ox. Oddly enough, I never checked mine. I was just so concerned with everybody else. His pulse ox went down to 89. I panicked because I didn't feel like he was getting better. Like, he had no appetite. The fever would go down a little bit, then it would come back up, So the goal was to send him to the hospital, a hospital that we admired. Can I say the name of the hospital?
Sure.
Paoli Hospital in PA. We admired that hospital for a long time. And so we were nervous and we wanted to get him oxygen. So the ambulance driver came, asked what was going on. He indicated, that his pulse ox was 89, and the ambulance driver said, don't worry about it, bud. My wife's was the same thing. They take him away. That's January the 3rd. He's in the ER. Now, throughout this whole time, it's probably the same commonality. Can't get a hold of him by phone. Same thing. I find out 5 days later, and I don't understand how it happened because my husband knew. I find out 5 days later that they put him on remdesivir. And my husband knew not to take that. So either they gave it to him unknowingly or they feared him into taking it.
Do you have his medical records?
Yes, they're actually in my car. 4,800 pages. And I also have them on a thumb drive. I cannot find anybody to read them. But I will tell you this, I'm not a medical person. I'm pretty intelligent, but not really. I'm too passionate about losing my husband. I'm too emotional. As I was flipping through the medical records, literally, I think it's page 8 of 4,800. It literally says, administered remdesivir, administered remdesivir, finally, in capital letters, finally, CO2 requirements worsened. The words finally, in capital letters. Now, prior to that, maybe on page 6, it was like they were shocked. They said, patient says he actually feels better. Actually was capitalized again. Okay, so I am trying to get a hold of the doctors. Of course, I'm begging, I'm crying, I'm pleading for ivermectin. No, that's not our protocol. So as I was talking to the doctor in PCU, there was a nurse next to him, a male. And when I was begging and crying for these medicines, the same medicines that my husband was begging for, when I was on the phone with the doctor, the nurse, a male nurse, he was a manager there in PCU, I could hear him say to the main doctor as I was on the phone with him when I was begging for that medicine, he had said, tell her she watches too much Fox News. So I immediately went ballistic. I filed a complaint. made sure that was addressed. And from what I know, he's no longer there, but he's still in the mainline health arena somewhere. So at any rate, that's basically what they did. They gave him the remdesivir. Of course, again, it's the same story. They give him the remdesivir, not high oxygen, right? Blow the lungs out, put him on a BiPAP, but blow the lungs out. And then, of course, you have no other choice but to get ventilated. Your lungs are already ruined. I was not allowed in to see him at that point when he was in the PCU. They did allow me to come up on January the 12th. He was vented. They allowed me to come up for like 10-15 minutes and see him through glass, and he literally took the mask off, and he just looked bewildered, and he said, I don't understand, I felt good, or I feel good, or something like that. It was just, I can't even explain the feeling. It was like when you have doctors telling you, his SATs are down and his lungs are being destroyed, but yet I can't even explain the experience that was in the hospital. It was just robotic, cold, just weird, insane. It was just nothing I've ever experienced before. When I was in a hospital, being in a hospital, just nothing I've ever experienced. When they allowed me to come up on the 12th of January to talk to him through the glass, he had dropped his phone by the bed, and the nurse never looked at me. She had come over to give me something, but she never even looked me in the eye. She just she opened the door a little bit, gave me something, and then went to the side of the bed and just stared that way. Like, never looked at me, never paid attention to him dropping his phone. I was banging on the glass saying, he dropped his phone. Just, she wouldn't even look me in the eye. So that was right before he was vented. And then, of course, he got vented on January the 12th. And I was in there every single day. Now here's the part where I'm probably gonna cry because it's brutal. I literally went into the hospital room and put like every single picture that I could find in the hospital room, because now at this point I knew like something is really strange here, something is just not right. And I put all his photos around the room because I wanted to like humanize him, and just let them know like he's so important to people. And he was a big builder in Chester County. There was a lot of people counting on him. A lot of people loved him, and I just wanted I wanted to humanize him. And oddly enough, there were two nurses that I felt really close with. I felt safe with them for some reason. I remember the one saying, I can't wait till he gets out, because he looks like he gives great bear hugs. And it's funny because that's what he was known for, the great bear hugs, And I remember I used to get so afraid when there were other nurses in there, some that I'd never seen before. Honestly, some were foreign. I didn't even know if they were affiliated with the hospital itself. It was just a very strange feeling. So he was on the ventilator. That's when I was allowed in every single day. I could stay as long as I wanted. Well, excuse me, I could stay for the visiting hours, 11 to 7. I had different people go up. You were only allowed one person a day, and it had to be the same person. I would allow a lot of his riding friends to go up, a lot of his builder friends to go up, because I wanted my husband to hear everybody's voice, to tell him to fight, keep going, and all this stuff. So so he did have visitors, and then I was noticing I would go in every day, which they were kind of getting fed up with, because I would walk in and I would immediately ask for all the stats. What's his PCO2? What's his PO2? How's his kidney? How's his urine output? How's his liver enzymes? Where are we on the sats? Where's the blood pressure? All this stuff. And I have a chart here that I actually brought. Like, this was the notebook that I used every single day to write down like all the stats every day. And the one nurse had pulled me aside the one day and basically kind of told me to take a break. She kept saying, we got him. And it was actually the one nurse that I really liked. I thought, maybe he's got a chance with these two nurses that I felt comfortable with. And again, when they weren't there, I was afraid. I was petrified. My husband, for a stocky guy, on the inside, he was kind of weak, like he didn't do well with medication. So the paralytics terrified me. fentanyl, morphine. He was literally on Precedex when I look in the medical records. You're only supposed to be on that for 24 hours. He was on it, I believe, his entire stay with the baricitinib, the entire stay. And when I tell you, if my husband ever had a prescription like for pain or something, he was like a lightweight. So, you know what I mean? So I was so nervous, terrified with all of those meds. And the odd thing is, towards the end, I noticed that on top of all that, they added propofol. And my thought was, even in the beginning, why would you give somebody these meds under respiratory distress, which causes extreme respiratory distress? You know, I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, I was just frozen on my couch in fear for 30 days, which brings up my other point. We all know, and can I say this? We all know they got bonuses. They got the 20% bonus on top of the bill. My husband's bill was $1.4 million. Do you know, through your stories, do you know I never got a hospital bill? I never got a bill from the insurance carrier for the deductible. Nothing. Zero. I called them after he had passed. I asked for the detailed billing. Then I asked for the detailed billing through the insurance carrier. I wanted to compare it together. And then, of course, I had grabbed the medical records. So, but I feel like there's something with this timeline. He passed on 2/13, which would have been 30 days on the vent. And I feel like that I just feel like there's something with the timeline of 30 days, whether the bonuses get decreased after 30 days, something. Because a lot of stories that I see, there are some that last longer on the vent, but a lot of stories I see, it happens within maybe 10 to 20 some odd days that they lose their loved one. So the last day that I went in was on February the 12th during the day to visit him. And he looked a little gray. Up until then, his color had been fantastic. Like every day I would go in, his urine was great, except for that last day. It didn't make any sense to me. That last day, his color was off. And I asked the nurse, and he just shook his head no. Like, no, he's not doing too good today. So needless to say, everything occurs at night. I went home, I prayed my head off, and I got a call at 10:12 on February the 12th in the evening that my husband had coded and to get there ASAP. Now I can't drive. I am beside myself. I cannot drive. My brother drove 35 minutes down to grab me, to bring me. While my brother was coming down, I got another phone call that he coded again. They had gotten him back and he coded again. And he passed away at 1:06 a.m., February 13th. So my brother drove me to the hospital. I was completely, obviously, as I'm sure you'd understand, I was irate. I was just blown away. The weird thing is, when I walked in there, it was empty. I mean empty. Nobody in any of the rooms, no patients, nobody at the nurse's station, no machines on in the nurse's station. It was, I honestly felt like I was walking into a movie set. Nobody was in there except the one attendant doctor whom I had never met before, and an aide. I don't think she was a nurse. She looked like an aide who I've never seen before. And so they let us say goodbye to my husband. He had passed at 1:06. I was in there probably till about 22 in the morning. And at the very end, I said to the aide, I want you to bring that doctor in here, which he did come in, and I let him have it. He would not look at me, and I basically said to him, I know what you did. I know what you all did, and you should take your medical record and throw it out the window. And he would not look at me. He just stood, he stared at the floor and shook his head yes. And then at that point, we grabbed my family and I left. And I'm just still, I just think I have like post-traumatic stress. Like I can't hear beeping noises. They basically, when they called me at 1:06, it was like they murdered me as well. They just took everything. And my little girl, I can't even tell you, you know how hard it is to have to walk up into a bedroom, you know, and tell your little girl, she was so positive like he was, that he was coming home. And to have to, you know, go up into the bedroom and tell her that, you know, Daddy wasn't coming back was like, I don't even have any words. This is just one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. It's crazy.
Can we see some pictures of him, please?
Of him, yes.
So this is him with...
Our little girl. She was
How old is she
13.
now?
She was 13.
It's a bit of a glare there.
And, you know, she's had 2 homecoming dances since then. And all he ever wanted was a little girl. And he got her, and they stole them from us.
They did steal him.
They did. And he was such a good person.
Was he treated badly, do you think? Was there an element of the fact that he hadn't had the COVID shot?
I believe he was, because when I was finally allowed in the room when he was vented, one nurse came in and stood beside his bed and just flat out asked me, may I ask why he wasn't vaccinated? And I said, yes, you can. And I said, and I will tell you that we as citizens have the right to do our own research. We're not against vaccinations. I've gotten all mine. My child has gotten all hers. But now I know better. And we wanted to research. That's all. That's all we wanted to do is research. I did say to her, because at that point I had found out remdesivir's nickname was Run Death is Near. Have you heard that phrase before? Of course. And so when I brought it up to her originally, she, come on, she looked like she never heard of that nickname, which is bull. Of course she did. But yes, and it does say in the medical records fairly often indicating that he was not vaccinated, which is apparently another commonality of what they're doing in the medical records over and over again.
Where's the picture of your little girl with him?
Oh, that's, I think you took it, did you not? Oh, here it is. I mean, these two were like the love of each other's lives. I just can't even describe. It is brutal. And you know what's sad too, the other day, she literally got bullied by somebody, you know, and man, he was just so intelligent, and he was so compassionate. Like he would cringe at anybody suffering, like even a stranger, he would cringe and he would just jump in and do something. And she came home from school the other day because she had gotten bullied, and it was like, man, like Daddy would know exactly what to say and what to do, and it's just hard, you know, it's me and her.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's not okay.
But you know what I mean. I appreciate it. It's just, it's crazy. I did request not one doctor reached out to me after he passed. I was so emotionally distraught for months that I finally reached out to the hospital and asked for a conference call, which I got one. It was with the pulmonologist and a doctor that I've never heard of. He was probably just a floor doctor, never seen him in my life, never met him, nothing. None of the other doctors got on the phone call. The one that was originally in PCU who made the decision to vent him, but the pulmonologist did get on the phone. And I finally had a conversation with him, and one of the things as well, when he was in the hospital, they kept denying me everything. Scans. We can't, he's too fragile. I asked for an ECMO machine because I was worried about his heart. Because I knew at that point what remdesivir could do and what was capable of. They told me we don't have an ECMO machine here at Paoli Hospital. I asked for a transfer to Temple Lung. They wouldn't do that either. Every single thing that I asked for was denied. Every single thing. I do have a text of my husband in the very beginning texting me and saying, why can't I just get the medicine I'm asking for? Why are they not giving me the medicine I'm asking for? And of course, one of them was budesonide, because we had read some research about that. But of course, the other two, they would not, you know, they wouldn't administer.
So 1.4 million he's worth. He was worth. Is that how much the hospital bill?
1.4 million was the bill, 20%, about 300,000, maybe 340, something like that. That's what my husband's life was worth to Paoli Hospital. 340, yeah. And me and my little girl are just left distraught.
What was the last thing he said to you or text you?
Oh, when I seen him in the glass is when he said, I don't understand. I feel good and I felt good yesterday. And then I just said to him, we have to do everything we can to get you home, because he didn't want to be vented.
Could you have got him out? If he said, I want to go home, and you said, I'm coming to get him, would you be able to walk out of there?
You know, I don't know. I think at that point, my husband was such a trusting person. He really believed that the medical community was there to help him, although he was very frustrated he couldn't get the meds that he was asking for. So you have this fine line, right, between trusting your medical community. You knew COVID was a bad thing, okay, but you didn't think the medical community themselves, as people, as human beings with feelings and hearts, would purposely go one direction. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, who thinks that? You just, it doesn't seem real. So he never said to me, sweetheart, get me out of here. He literally thought that they were, you know, trying to treat him properly, but he was aggravated that he couldn't get the medicine that he asked for sure. Yeah.
We're really sorry this happened. And
I appreciate it.
I think you know that there are, I don't even know, countless.
I know.
I mean, it's petrifying how
It
many
is.
they've killed.
It is. I seriously, and I think a lot of the widows that I talk to that are in our group, I'm sure you heard of the chbmp.org,
Yes.
our group, there's a lot of us, I think, that have post-traumatic stress, and it's sad. Like I was diligent in going to the, you know, annual checkups every year. I have not been to a doctor since.
No.
I have not been to a doctor since he passed.
And
I
have
just
you looked at the vaccinations, the other vaccinations now? All right, that's next up. I've got a book for you. I'm going to go and give it to you.
Okay.
Because these babies and your daughter, how old is your daughter, you said?
Oh, my daughter, they tried talking me into giving her the Gardasil. No. No, no.
Because
Yeah.
you cannot.
No, I know. But yes, Paoli Hospital made probably over 300,000, and that's what my husband's life was worth to them. And it meant a lot more to us, you know?
Disgusting.
It is. I appreciate
his
you
name
guys.
on that?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, hang on.
Thank you.